Old school RuneScape's new skill, sailing, is moving into the next stage of development, and Jagex have set up a Discord to get feedback and discussion on their ideas. I was chosen as a contributor, along with about 150 others, to give feedback on specific topics for sailing, including gameplay loops, navigation scale, rewards, integration, and lore considerations. While the contributors have a separate chat set up, a GC chat over here, for in-depth discussion, the Discord is open to everyone, and there are public discussion channels that you can join in as well. They're also doing private Q&A style live streams called stages in the Discord regularly that anyone can listen in on. I'll have the link for the Discord in the description for anyone who wants to join. The next discussion is this Friday at 10:15 a.m. my time, and it's going to be on navigational mechanics. In this video, I'm going to get into a bit of a ramble style discussion on some of the stuff that has been discussed so far in the contributors chat, as well as some ideas on things that might be coming up soon and things that the JMods have touched on. While I do this, I'll be playing some barrows, so feel free to watch or just listen. And also consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me out a lot, and I'll be posting more videos about the sailing discussions down the line. So basically, one of the main discussions that's been happening just coming up is on the navigational mechanics. And the main question that I have and that a lot of other people have discussed in the chat is like how much the navigational mechanics, that is, how you move around on the sea, how much that's actually going to matter when you're training the skill. Like, for example, agility. Like, moving around is a key part of agility, because if you can move better, then you get better XP. And that's explicit in places like Sepulchre, where you're like consistently just moving around obstacles. But it's also, you know, if you can move a little more efficiently, you're going to get faster XP even at the more traditional courses. But that's not necessarily true about a lot of other skills. Like, you know, Slayer, obviously, like, it's just Slayer. Like, yes, you move around to get to various tasks, but the core way that you train is not tied to your movement. So in that way, like, sailing could be the same. You're just moving around on the water, and the core way that you get XP is something totally different. This is something that I think is probably the best way to go, because ultimately I don't want moving around on the water to be a chore. I don't want it to be hard to move around in a way that, like, oh, it's hard, but you get XP for rewarding it, so it's fine. I think moving around should be as smooth as possible on the water. Now, that as smooth as possible, what does that really mean? Well, that's not clear, because the core of navigation is point and click on the ground. I point over here, I click over here. I point over here, I move over there. But if that's the way it works for your ship, then that's a bit different. Like, if you're on the ship, or are you the ship, and how you're going to move around, is it going to be the exact same as it is on land? Can you, like, dance between two squares on the water like you can on the land? No thanks, Miles. Who knows? That'll be left to see. So the mods have been discussing that a fair bit, and that's the main topic of discussion right now and for the next week or two. And they're going to be putting out a blog about it, or a more focused discussion Monday, I think, and maybe a blog next week around the same time or a little after. Oh, this route's a different color. That's weird. But for now, I think it's just in the discussion stages. One of the other things that's been discussed a bit from the training loop perspective is, like, what does the skill look like under different increments of time? So, for example, like, I think the person mentioned, like, 5 minutes, 1 minute, 30 minutes, 3 hours. And obviously those are very different. Like, in 1 minute when you're fishing, you, like, find a fishing spot and start casting. In 5 minutes, you know, your inventory starts to fill up with various fish. In you know, in 3 hours, you're not only banking the fish, you're leveling up, you're, like, catching new fish. Maybe you're figuring out what you want to do with the fish. You're getting experience in other skills, cooking or preparing or just dropping or selling. So that's kind of something we want to know about sailing. Like, what does the 1 minute of sailing look like? What does the 30 minutes of sailing look like? And what can I get done in 3 hours of training? And what would be the tangible impact of that? That's basically one of the core of the gameplay loop discussions, as in what would it literally look like to train. And I think they were going to focus on that pretty early, but it pretty much turned out that we couldn't really figure out the gameplay loop without looking at the navigation mechanics and how you just move around. So I think that's why they pushed that one first. But the gameplay loop should be coming up pretty soon after the navigation is touched on. Because once we know how we're moving about the water, then for sure the next more important thing is to say just, okay, so how does that give you experience? And how is sailing trained, basically? This guy's impressed by my staff. So am I, just got it. Some of the other stuff that's been talked about, Maud Elena asked a question to the contributors about the map scale. So one of the things that's inherent with the current map is that a lot of the scales, the sizes on the map are not actually that big. So let's take a look at this around, let's say, Tutorial Island Wizard's Tower. So the distance to sail from Port Sarum to Tutorial Island, let's say you, well, maybe not that one. Let's say the distance to sail from the charter ship over to Temperos, it's less than it is to walk the length of Shiloh Village. So that's really close. That's maybe 10 seconds. And if you're walking from here to there with your ship, assuming you can move at running speed, the world is going to feel pretty small and crowded. So say you expanded the water out this way, and then you kind of moved everything around a little bit. Maybe Apital goes a bit further south. Crandor is tucked in here, maybe that moves a bit further out. That's something that they're considering doing in terms of map scale. However, that's not the only solution for this sort of question. One of the ideas that Monalena touched on is having 3 different types of water and 3 different types of ships. So you have your shallow water, your medium water, and your deep water. And maybe in each of those areas it would work slightly differently. You could only use a little rowboat in the shallow water, or a canoe or something. In the medium water you could use a solid boat, and then in the deep water you'd have to use an extremely large ship. And that would make it so that you could scale things differently. So if you're in your small boat, obviously you're probably moving the same sort of speed that you would as a person. If you're moving as a big boat, then you can move slightly differently. But you could also set it to change the size of what you're looking at. So if you're a small boat, then you're going to want to look at your own character probably, because you're oh, I'm just on this boat, I'm still my character. But if you're a bigger boat, maybe you want to control the boat instead of your character. And at that point, you can shrink the boats maybe so that you're looking at a miniature model of what the boat would be, even though it's actually quite a large ship. There's other options that you could take for scale and for how to move around in general. The next idea that I saw that was cool was from Mod Husky, and he was talking about navigation as well, which again is the current focus of discussion. But one of the things he was talking about was engine upgrades, and this was mentioned in the initial survey that went out a week or 2 ago. And it was basically talking about the options for point and click versus arrow key movement or interface movement, or any other kind of combination of different methods, which is pretty interesting because those are definitely engine upgrades to run something like that we haven't had in the game before. But what Mod Husky was saying is, listen guys, this is a huge project. We have the support for engine upgrades. So if we're talking about how we're going to design these things, we don't have to think about whether or not that's possible in the current engine. We just have to think about how do we want it to act, and then they will get the engine support to make that happen. And that's pretty interesting because, obviously the engine dictates how the game feels pretty much. So, you know, like we can definitely change the engine if we want some advanced features, but if we change it too much, then who knows whether it'll still feel like OSRS. So that's something to consider, but it definitely makes me more optimistic that they are willing to make some drastic changes to make sure that this feels right and feels intuitive, which is the main sort of thing you want, because if you're trying to train a new skill and it just doesn't make any sense, you're just going to get frustrated and you're not going to do it. One of the other things that was talked about, they've touched on PvP a little bit. They've touched on you know, the idea that PvP doesn't have to just mean standard OSRS combat but on a ship. It could mean something totally different, like a minigame, or like just a totally open PvP battle that could be, you know, off the shore of the wilderness or anything. So there's all sorts of things that could be happening there. Mod Light touched on the idea of what we're looking for in the polls. One of the things that I think a lot of the contributors have been talking about recently has been about the level of detail that we're expecting. And yeah, this is kind of like a behind the scenes sort of thing from Jagex, but they're like, yeah, we don't really know like at what level you guys will be happy and like, you know, vote yes. Like how much detail do you want before we go to a poll? And obviously this is like the first time that they've done this kind of adjusted detail level for a skill. So it's very complicated, but suffice to say they're like trying to get as much out there as possible, and definitely want to get everyone involved. That being said, there's not too much more I can go into at this point. Obviously the discussions are still starting. If you're interested in joining the discussions, again, the Discord is open to all, but also I'm looking for information from you guys. So if you have a specific question or concern about how sailing might work, please drop it in the comments, because I have, you know, I have questions of my own to pass on, but I think what's important here is that, like, you know, I'm only one person and only 150 people were allowed to be a part of the contributing team. So if we can get questions passed on from people who weren't part of that group, then we'll have a much larger, you know, a lot more heads put together towards the problem and be able to figure out what exactly we're trying to do and what exactly sailing should look like. So yeah, please drop your comments on that and let me know what you think. If you like this sort of discussion, it's more of a basic ramble type discussion, check out some of my other older videos, or check out some of my more newer videos, which are more about straight up info drops and stuff. Again, please subscribe to the channel if you feel like it, because it definitely helps me out a lot. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers. And until next time, peace.